Welcome back, everyone. In today's lecture, we are going to dive into the topic of sleep and how it impacts your health and well-being. We're going to look at the physiological underpinnings of sleep. Why do we sleep? What causes us to do it? And what are its health benefits? We'll look at the detriments of getting insufficient sleep, both quantity and quality. We'll look at those habits and behaviors that might impede or negatively impact getting a good night of sleep. And lastly, we'll look at strategies to improve your personal sleep. And we cover this topic because sleep is incredibly important to your overall well being. When I first started teaching this course, I didn't really cover sleep. It wasn't in the course outline, and we looked at things like nutrition and physical activity and stress and communication. And I found that time and time again, my students were struggling to stay awake or to engage with the other class material because they were tired. And I realized that many of my students were and are getting insufficient sleep for a variety of reasons that we're going to look at today, and that it was negatively impacting their mental, emotional, and physical well being. So that's what we're going to look at now. First, why do we sleep and how does it happen? If you think about it, roughly 1/3 of our time on this planet is spent asleep. So obviously, if natural selection, if evolution was going to prioritize the continuation of sleep, a time period where we're not out foraging or finding food historically, or keeping ourselves safe from predators, or in the modern day, doing something productive, there must be good reason for this 1/3 of our time to be spent horizontal and unproductive. So let's see some of the theories or some of the things that are happening while we're asleep. First, we have neuronal housekeeping and neurotoxin removal. So over time, toxins can build up throughout your body and your brain, and this will impact your neurons, your nervous system. And while you sleep, you have this neuronal housekeeping that happens that helps repair and heal your neurons and nervous system for optimal nervous system functioning. This is hugely important when we get to things like memories, like cognitive function, like cognitive health with age. So our nervous system, our brain, our spinal cord, our nervous system functions like thinking, feeling, executing behaviors are all dependent on sufficient quality sleep. We also see that during sleep, we consolidate our memories. So the things that we learn throughout the day, whether they're material that we learn in a class or things that we just learn through interactions in our day-to-day life, these things get stored in our memory banks during sleep. And sleep impacts and helps heal and recover every single body system. So your cells are constantly turning over, being broken down, repaired, and rebuilt. And much of this repair, growth, and rebuilding happens while you are asleep. So if you're getting insufficient sleep, this repair, whether it be muscle tissue, bone tissue, whether it be cardiac tissue or nervous system cells, much of this repair will be slowed down. Sleep is integral for this recovery and repair process. Now, our nighttime sleep happens in stages, technically 4 stages that are split into 2 categories. These are non-REM and REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement. So non-REM has 3 stages, 1, 2, and 3, and REM is its distinct stage. During non-REM sleep, you have progressively deeper phases of sleep. Stage 1 being the lightest when you're first falling asleep, stage 2, progressively deeper, and stage 3, our deepest and most restorative stage of sleep. An interesting note is that you spend more time in stage 3 sleep earlier in the night, particularly before the hour of midnight. So that's one of the reasons that getting to sleep at a relatively earlier time is important. You'll actually spend more time in restorative sleep, sleeping from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. than you would from 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. You'll spend more time in that stage 3 restorative sleep. Now, during the non-REM sleep, your physiology slows down. So you have a decrease in things like your heart rate, your breathing rate, your blood pressure, your body temperature. All of these things drop to allow for these restorative sleep processes. REM sleep is a little bit different. As I said, REM stands for rapid eye movement, and this involves movement of your eyes from side to side. And your physiology is much more like that of when you're awake. Your heart rate is closer to when you're awake, breathing rate, body temperature, etc. And during this stage, most of dreaming occurs. So there's something that happens during the REM stage of sleep where much of dreaming occurs. And you cycle through these 4 stages throughout the night. You're progressively getting deeper sleep, REM sleep, and then you move back through the stages. With each full cycle of sleep, roughly taking about 90 minutes. So what drives us towards sleep? We know that sleep is restorative. We know that it's required for memory consolidation, for nervous system health, for really the health of our entire physiology and all of our body systems. But what tells us to sleep? There are 2 major things: circadian rhythm and homeostatic regulation. Circadian rhythm is a 24-hour biological clock that all of our cells are constantly responding to. And this biological clock is attuned to things like light and temperature exposure. So your body has cells your body's cells are responding to the environment to guess or figure out what time it is outside to release appropriate hormones for appropriate physiological function. So things like bright light and warm temperature would alert your body towards wakefulness. This is going to increase the hormone known as cortisol. Cortisol often gets a bad rap as a stress hormone, and when it runs rampant, it can be problematic, but cortisol is hugely important for getting through your day, for having a functioning nervous system, for waking up in the morning. So light exposure helps you do that. Cortisol should peak earlier in the morning and gradually drop throughout the day to allow you to become sleepier. Another hormone that's involved in your circadian rhythm that you may have heard of before is called melatonin. This is often taken in supplement form by folks who struggle falling asleep. Melatonin peaks later in the day due to reduced light and temperature exposure, and it can only peak if and when cortisol drops. So if you're having a very stressful day, you have a very stressful time in the evening, you get a lot of light exposure in the evening, this may suppress natural melatonin production. So this 24-hour rhythm happens throughout the body and is sensitive to things like light and temperature exposure. This drives you towards sleep at appropriate or inappropriate times based on your exposures. The next one is homeostatic regulation. As you may have heard me say in class before, homeostasis is sort of our body's neutral physiological state, where our breathing rate, our blood pressure, our temperature, etc., are steady. We also have a homeostatic drive towards sleep, such that the longer we go without sleep, the more we have hormones build up that make us feel tired. One of the way that caffeine works is that it blocks these hormones so that we feel a bit more alert than we otherwise would. So the longer we are away from the last time we've slept, the more these hormones increase and the more we have homeostatic drive towards sleepiness and eventually falling asleep, such that sometimes folks with sleep disorders will actually be encouraged to skip a period of time of sleep so that the homeostatic drive increases and they're able to fall asleep later. So this looks at why we sleep, when we do, kind of what we're doing with it and what drives us towards it. How much sleep do we actually need? Well, generally speaking, the younger you are, the more growth processes are happening and the more sleep that you need. So babies sleep as much as 16 to 18 hours per day, more than half of the day, up to 2/3. Children and teens need about 8 to 10 hours per night, and we are largely not seeing children and teens getting this in the United States, again, because they have massive growth processes happening that adults just don't have. Adults need about 7 to 9 hours for optimal functioning. That is the requirement, 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. And some individuals may find they do well with 8, some may find that they feel best with 7, and some may feel better with 9, but somewhere in there is optimal for adults. You'll hear some adults say, I sleep 5 hours per night every night and I'm perfectly fine. And while you may feel fine, it's likely that for most folks in this case, you have adapted to your physiological state, to your physiological stressors, and that you're not actually functioning from a cognitive, physiological, psychological, emotional, decision-making, etc. perspective optimally. So 7 to 9 hours per night is the key that we're looking for. Sleep requirements and capacity generally drop with age. So the older you get, while you still have repair processes going on, you don't have as much growth, and the repair processes start to slow down with age. Importantly, 1/3 of US adults get fewer than 7 hours, which we know is the minimum, fewer than 7 hours of sleep per night. So that's 1 out of every 3 of us not getting enough sleep. And I see that this number tends to actually trend higher in my own observed anecdotal experience in young people and college students who might be working in the evening or shift work, who might be going out with friends at night, who might be spending time on technology. All of these things may negatively impact getting a minimum sufficient amount of sleep. And you might be thinking, what's the big deal? I have so many things to do. I have to work. I have to go to school. I have to care for friends and family. I like to spend some time for myself in the evening. What's the big deal if I get 6 hours or 5 hours per night? Well, we're going to look into that here. And lastly, the note here, what is your chronotype? Chronotype refers to sort of your best time of night to fall asleep and best time of morning to wake up. So you all might feel that you sort of naturally fall into an early bird or early riser type feel, or you might be a night owl. And this is generally dictated by the time of day when you feel most alert and productive. I do think this can be shifted somewhat by the schedules you've habituated to, your work shifts, your light exposure, etc. So if you're a night nurse, you might find that over time you're more alert and awake at night and sleepier during the day. But most people tend to have a chronotype that they gravitate toward best. And if and when possible, it's best to schedule your life in accordance with this. So if you know that you're someone who gets better work done in the evening, maybe you can schedule your classes or your work schedules to accommodate that, and vice versa if you're an early bird. Now, let's look to the benefits of getting a good night's sleep, both quantity and quality. As I mentioned, it's essential for all physical and physiological systems, for all functioning. It consolidates memory and improves learning. So when I was younger, my dad used to say, when you're preparing for a test, don't pull an all-nighter. Spend some time studying and then get a good night's sleep. And there is a ton of research to back this up. My dad was before his time. It is much better to learn material and get a sufficient night's sleep. You'll consolidate that material better rather than spending an all-nighter cramming. There's a ton of research showing that cramming, spending all-nighters does not actually improve outcomes on tests compared to spreading studying over time and getting sufficient sleep. It clears away nervous system toxins and plaques. So plaques are the development of toxins and plaque in the brain. And this plaque can contribute to the development of things like Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. So clearing these out reduces the risk of cognitive decline. In fact, quality sleep is one of the only known things, one of the major known things that we can do to reduce the risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia. Quality sleep improves mood. This is a huge correlation with insufficient sleep being correlated to things like anxiety and depression, hugely so. And again, as you know, because we just covered this is a huge issue for college students, for all people, but particularly young people, college students with up to 60% struggling with anxiety or depression at any given time. So getting sufficient sleep will help improve mood. However, this can be a bit of a catch-22 when an individual is struggling with anxiety or depression. It can be harder to fall asleep, and getting insufficient sleep can promote depression and anxiety. So we'll look at that in a minute. Getting sufficient sleep helps improve decision-making. You're more likely to engage in healthier eating, physical activity, and make safe decisions around driving, around risky behaviors, etc. Getting sufficient sleep can help manage weight, even outside of its impacts on exercise and eating. Of course, when you get insufficient sleep, you're less likely to want to exercise. When you're tired, you're less likely to make healthy eating decisions. But even when they control for those changes, folks who sleep 7 or more hours per night weigh less than folks who sleep 6 or fewer. Getting sufficient sleep helps improve your immune function and overall reduces your risk of developing all major causes of chronic disease. What happens when you don't get enough sleep? As I mentioned, it's related to increased weight gain over time. So the Nurses Health Study looked at this. Even when they controlled for calories and physical activity, those who slept 6 or fewer hours per night weigh more than those who sleep 7 to 9. So insufficient sleep worsens perceptions and feelings of stress and worsens mental health outcomes, things like anxiety and depression, in a bi-directional way. So if you get insufficient sleep, you're more likely to be anxious or depressed. If you're experiencing anxiety or depression, you're less likely to be able to fall asleep. It also increases your risk of car crashes, accidental injury. In fact, many of you probably know that in California now, high schools must start at 8:30 a.m. or later. When I went to high school back in the day, we started at 7:25 a.m. And the reason they made this requirement is because they saw that when they piloted this at some schools, that rates of depression and anxiety in teens went down, test scores went up, and car crashes and accidental injury rates went down. Great outcomes. We see poor decision-making when you get insufficient sleep, both higher risk-taking behavior, poor decision-making behind the wheel, etc. And we see an increased risk of all major chronic diseases, things like diabetes, heart attack, and stroke. And your risk of obesity goes up. So let's look at what the activities and behaviors are that negatively impact sleep. What's getting in the way for folks that is making us, 1/3 of us in the United States, get insufficient amounts of sleep each night? There are some major activities. One of the biggest ones are altered light viewing patterns. And this is both in the morning and in the evening. So lots of people know about blue light, which comes in high doses from our screens and technology in the evening, negatively impacting sleep. But what many folks don't know is getting insufficient light early in the day can also negatively impact sleep. So if we are not getting sufficient light exposure to our eyes in the morning, this doesn't set our circadian rhythm up for the day. What you want is good light exposure early in the day and minimal light exposure from all spectrums later in the evening. We also see that excessive caffeine or alcohol intake or other substances, uppers, can negatively impact sleep. Lots of folks feel that alcohol improves sleep. And while it may make it easier for you to fall asleep, it is harder to stay asleep and get quality sleep with alcohol. So anything more than 2 glasses of alcohol per day for men and 1 for women is enough to negatively impact sleep. And everyone has a different caffeine sensitivity threshold. On average, the half-life of caffeine is about 6 hours, meaning that 6 hours after you consume caffeine, half of that is still present in your system. So let's say if you consume 100 milligrams of caffeine at 2 p.m., at 8 p.m., you could still expect 50 milligrams of caffeine to be in your system. So depending on you, your physiology, your caffeine exposure, your tolerance to that will vary. Erratic sleep schedules negatively impact sleep. This means that some days you go to bed at 10, some days you go to bed at 1, some days you go to bed at 3, and you wake up at varying times as well. Your circadian rhythm, your homeostatic drive, can't easily set to regular sleep times and behaviors. When you have a baby or you're reading up on sleep for babies, one thing they tell you is put your baby to sleep at similar times each day. A big part of this is so that their body gets used to feeling sleepy at a certain time. I know this can be very difficult for college students who are often working in the evenings some nights and not in others. Insufficient physical activity can make it so that your body and your brain are not tired enough to go to sleep. Stress, having a hard time coping, life stressors coming up can make it challenging, both in that they'll cause rumination and ruminative thinking patterns, as well as increases in the hormone cortisol, which is an alertness arousal hormone. Poor sleep environment, lots of light exposure, warmth, noise can make it difficult to fall asleep, And of course, as many of us know, late night technology use that both keeps our brain alert and aroused, exposes us to light, and just makes it difficult for us to put the darn thing down in power down in time to go to sleep. So, what then can we do about these things? These are the research backed tools to support adequate sleep. Whenever possible, practice the following. And again, I like to remind you all, you do not have to be perfect when it comes to your health. I don't expect you to do all of these things. It's not realistic for everybody to do all of these things all the time, but perhaps you can pick one or two of these to start implementing now. The first, and possibly one of the simplest, being view early morning sunlight. So, sunglasses off, outside when possible. So, not looking through a window in your car or your house, and get some sunlight in your eyes. 2 to 10 minutes of sunlight, not staring directly at the sun, is sufficient to start setting up that circadian rhythm. Adjust and limit light exposure at night. So, meaning you can use blue light blockers, but even better, keep overhead lights off. Minimize long screen time exposures. Don't turn on lights in every room that you go in. Use dim tap lights or warmer low level lights in the evening when you can. Blue light glasses are an option, or you can get blue light blocking apps on your phones or computers. Many phones are equipped now with timers or settings that allow it to switch more to a warm light in the evening. Most importantly, though, when it comes to nighttime light, would be managing nighttime technology use. For many of my students, I see this to be the biggest barrier, and certainly it can be for myself at times too. Whether it's Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or Netflix or whatever it is, giving yourself a hard deadline of a time to turn it off, and then keeping that phone, that tablet, that computer outside of your bedroom, or at least outside of your reach in your bed, is huge. Even though my phone is plugged in next to my bed, I always make sure to set it down on the floor and outside of easy reach, so I can't just reach for it without intentionally thinking about it. I don't just see it and grab it like I might so often with my phone. Physical activity is key. If you're not getting any physical activity in now, try it out and see how much more tired you feel at the end of the day. The key with physical activity for sleep is that for most people, it's best not to do this right before bed, sometime earlier in the day, or at least in the evening, a couple hours before bed. Determine your caffeine and alcohol limit. So figure out your own sensitivity. If you're drinking a lot of caffeine throughout the day and you do find you have a hard time falling asleep, see if you can walk that back a little bit and find if it makes a difference. And then alcohol, as we mentioned, some people it's any alcohol, but the guidelines are 1 drink for women and 2 for men. Beyond that can impact sleep. As much as possible, sleep and wake at consistent times. And I know this won't always be doable for college students or for those who may work in the evening. I get it, as much as possible. The next couple are for if stress or rumination keep you up, you can try a brain dump. A brain dump is where you keep a journal next to your bed, or even you use the journal or the apps, notes app on your phone to just dump out everything you're thinking about. Lots of times people think, well, if I intentionally think about it, won't I think about it more? And in fact, we find that the opposite is true. If you write everything down on paper is best, or type it out on your phone, you actually get it out of your head and onto a page, and you feel as though you can stop ruminating about it. So that can be really helpful with nighttime stress. Stretching, yoga, breath work, meditation, mindfulness apps. Many folks find these useful. Lots of folks like to use the 4-7-8 breath we discussed. Taking a warm shower or bath can be useful. Interestingly, being cooler temperatures actually help you fall asleep. Your body has to cool down a few degrees to get into deep sleep. And so you might think taking a bath or shower before might be a bad idea. But if you take a warm shower or bath, your body heats up. And once you get out, it actually starts dumping heat from your core temperature, and you'll have a compensation response of cooling down. Not to mention, it also helps increase feelings of relaxation for many people. And then eating a light meal a few hours before bed generally works best for most, ensuring that you're neither hungry nor full when you're going to sleep, as both of those states can negatively impact sleep for many. And what does an ideal sleep environment look like? As best as possible, you want the room to be dark. So blackout shades, blackout curtains, a piece of cardboard in the window, I've been known to do before, the best you can to minimize light coming into the room. Even ambient street light, TVs, computers, bright lights in the room on can absolutely negatively impact sleep and can increase nighttime levels of things like cortisol. You want the room and the space to be cool, sufficiently cool so your body temperature can cool down, which will help you move towards sleep. Experiment with sound. Some folks like it completely silent. Some folks like something like white noise to block out ambient sound and help with sleep. Make your bedroom a spot for sleep. This means that if you can't fall asleep, rather than laying there and stressing about sleep, after 20 or 30 minutes, get up and do a light activity. And then when you feel sleepy again, get back to bed. Additionally, as best as possible, try to avoid working in bed, watching TV in bed, doing classwork in bed, as this associates your brain with bed as a space for work rather than just a space for rest. So ideally, look through these things and see if you can find one or maybe two to start implementing this semester and see how your sleep improves. If you'd like to look further into the science of sleep, these are these are my sources for the material that we've covered. We have these 2 articles on sleep for the class as well. And there is great work around sleep from the scientist Matt Walker, who has TED Talk videos and a book, Why We Sleep, on the topic. So find a strategy, start now. Again, make these details smart, tiny, and actionable. Ensure that it's something small that you can do, that at the end of the day, you can check, yes, I did it, or no, I did not. And aim for, on a scale of 1 to 10, when you're looking at how reasonable is this goal and how important is this goal to me right now, ideally, both of those answers would be a 7 or more. If not, shift the habit or make it even smaller to ensure that you can complete it. All right, take care and get some good rest.